It's my pleasure to be here tonight to discuss online education as a means to readying people for the workplace of the 21st century. This evening, we will focus on ways in which online education has been effective, try and see where the gaps are, and look at the role of business in using it as a platform to ensure that they have a labor force that keeps them competitive. I also hope to touch on other ways in which online education might contribute to educational tasks beyond pure vocational learning, such as producing good citizens or assisting people in learning and growing in knowledge for its own sake. This last attribute, wanting to learn more, may also be a vocational need in a fast-changing and technology-driven world. For centuries, it has also been considered by many to be an important element in helping us grow into our humanity. Toward the end of this evening's program, the audience will have the opportunity to ask questions of our esteemed panelists by writing a question on the blue question card and holding it up for a World Affairs Council staff member to pick up. You may also tweet your questions to @world_affairs and use the hashmark OnlineEd. So, here tonight to discuss these issues with me are Nicholas Dirks and Sebastian Thrun. Nicholas B. Dirks became the 10th Chancellor of the University of California, Berkeley on June 1st, 2013. An internationally renowned historian and anthropologist, he is a leader in higher education and an advocate for accessible, high-quality undergraduate education in the liberal arts and sciences, as well as a globalization of the university and innovations across both basic and applied disciplines. He was previously Executive Vice President for Arts and Sciences and Dean of the Faculty at Columbia University. As Franz Boas Professor of Anthropology and History, Dirks joined Columbia in 1997 as Chair of the Anthropology Department. He had previously taught history and anthropology at the University of Michigan for 10 years and taught Asian history and civilization at the California Institute of Technology. Sebastian Thrun is a research professor at Stanford, a Google Fellow, and co-founder and CEO of Udacity. Early on, he designed and built robots such as Rhino, which gave tours around the museum at the University of Bonn, Pearl, an assistant elder care facilities, and Stanley, a self-driving car. At Google, he ran projects including Google's autonomous vehicle, the Google Glass wearable computer, and Project Loon, a high-altitude balloon carrying internet access to the undeveloped world. While teaching as a professor of computer science and electrical engineering at Stanford, he began creating video lessons identical to those he was giving his students and made them available to the entire world online. These attracted 1.6 million students and became a model for Udacity, an online private educational institution designed to give millions access to courses designed to advance higher education and careers. A few weeks ago, Udacity raised $35 million for a total raised over the past 3 years to $58 million. In that short time, the company has experimented with teaching relatively advanced college courses, remedial learning for college preparation, and most recently what Mr. Thrun calls nano degrees, which involve teaching working people additional skills. Companies that have signed on for this program include Google, Facebook, and Salesforce. Gentlemen, welcome to the evening. Let's begin by addressing a fairly high-level question, which I hope will help frame our discussion. And that is, past the most minimal training, what is education for? Should we think of it as skills preparation? Should we think of it as advancement of new knowledge and research? Should we think of it as a social good for creating well-rounded citizens? And most importantly, what are the new demands that are created by the world today and where you see it going? Chancellor, why don't you begin?
Well, I'm an historian, so I always begin with a little bit of historical background. And the interesting thing about this set of questions you just asked is they've been asked now for a very long time in this country. And there have been debates over the course of the 19th and the entire 20th century about what the principal goals of education are, whether it's in fact to train, as many of the early founders of colleges and universities in the 18th and 19th century thought, modeling themselves partly on the German university and then later on the English university, that it was to form the moral and intellectual character of our young people, to train them to be citizens, to train them to be, but more than anything else, to train them to be moral subjects. Mm-hmm. And of course, a lot of this goes back to religious education, training for the clergy, and also training of the elite for roles that were seen as being very, as requiring certain kinds of religious forms of education and moral attitudes and the like. At the same time, especially with the rise of industrialization and the spread of universities and colleges across the United States, including to the University of California, which was established in Berkeley in 1868, there was a growing sense that one actually had to train people for vocational ends. One had to train them for real skills, that one had to train them for jobs. And University of California was an interesting amalgam. It was set up as a kind of hybrid enterprise. It was to train both the moral and intellectual faculties on the one side and the mechanical and vocational on the other. And it was, in fact, so successful that by 1910, a number of people actually wrote that Berkeley was an extraordinary university. It was as good in metaphysics as it was in mechanics. And in many ways, it's continued that kind of tradition. But of course, it's continued that in concert with almost every other major leading college and university in the country. So there's been a debate. It's gone back and forth. And today, the current debate about training for skills, training for jobs, training for actual work, employment opportunities in the marketplace is, of course, the continuation, as I say, of a much longer debate. What is education for? You know, I'm both a traditionalist in that sense and a visionary, I would like to say, because I think that, or rather, let me put that differently, a utopian, because I continue to believe that we can do it all. I continue to believe that we can train students in general liberal arts and sciences and train them for real life needs, skills, jobs, vocations, knowing, however, two things. One, that we want to train people at universities like ours to be leaders, and therefore not just to be slotted into an existing set of institutions, whether in the corporate world or elsewhere. And second, that the world is changing more quickly than ever before. So what are we training for? Even looking 5, 6, 7, 8 years out, we're not altogether sure. The average person today has 7 different careers. So we are training people not just for multiple careers, we're training them to create new careers. And as such, I think we have to hold on to the full kind of understanding of what education is for that motivated the founders of my university back in the 1860s.
You raise a couple of interesting questions right away, which is, for the one part, during an industrial period, skills levels were very clear.
Right.
But now as we move into a world of computing everywhere, people are finding that collaborative skills and knowing who to ask for information matter just as much. So that social dimensions and what used to be called moral dimensions still figure quite large. It's just a question of placing them. But Sebastian, how would you speak to the question?
Yes, so Udacity was created in 2012. I'm neither a historian nor an utopian. I'm probably just a horrible pessimist. For me, and I get bugged by things.
We've achieved balance.
There you are.
For me, humans are distinct by their absolute innate desire to learn. We are sponges for learning, more so than any other species on the planet. In fact, we've gotten it to the point that through technology, we can take what we learn and put it in digital form all the way back to the book, which is the first digital expression of knowledge, to today, so we can multiply and this learn thing among generations and different countries and different ages, all the way to any aspect of human life. So an educator for me is just someone who guides that learning. Right? And that learning is for many purposes. You named pretty much everything that comes to mind. It's for feeling good about yourself and for being able to contribute to society. What bugs me, and the reason why I'm pessimistic, is much of the educational system we see today was invented at a completely different time, where the work patterns are very different, and the technology was very different. So for example, our school year in K-12 to the present date is 178 days long, roughly. It's about half the year if you work it out. And that dates back to a time when most of us were farmers, and the kids just have to help in summer with farming. And that's long gone. We moved from farming to industrial age, to manufacturing, and then to a service society. but the system as a whole is still kind of retaining the old structure. Chancellor nicely mentioned the 7 careers that we have today. That's the number I have as well. So the Department of Labor estimates that the average tenure per job is about 4.5 years roughly at this point. And that's new. It's really new. So my great-grandparents, my grandparents did not only have just one job during their lifetime, they also had the same job as their father and their mothers. Mm-hmm. In fact, jobs, just like car brands in our family, turns out I'm German, were like passed from generation to generation. Right? So dad is a BMW driver, son is a BMW driver. Dad is a car mechanic, son was a car mechanic. Now, at that time, I would venture, when technology was actually moving fast but slow by today's standards, I think it made perfect sense to have a single phase where we'd say education should be starting over here, intense. The technology didn't allow for efficient dissemination, so coming to campus was a logical choice. And also age-wise made sense because these are young people who didn't quite have a family yet and didn't have obligations to a mortgage or whatever it was. And then after their education, they would get the degree that would entitle them to their job, and they would just stay in their job. And medicine wasn't so good, so people didn't live that long, so it was actually much easier in that sense. Today, people live longer, have more careers. But we're still kind of not moving from this old model. So to me, I guess that sounds very pessimistic. Trying to be optimist. To me, what I envision is kind of a world where learning and education, guided learning, is used just like a toothbrush, like twice a day for 5 minutes for the rest of your life. I'm a member of 2 educational providers. One's called Stanford, one's called Georgia Tech. I'm teaching actually this moment right now, it turns out, online. Just very easy to teach online these days. And these providers, they come to you and serve you, and when they're done, they stop serving you, and at best I do this myself, shake the handshake from this to this. But every other provider in my life, my water company and my cable company, my medical provider, they all serve me for a lifetime. So I envision that the university of the future ought to serve us for a lifetime, given that the work pattern changed so much, and given that technology is now available to make this happen. We've seen an enormous explosion of technology. Almost any field of work has massively changed, except 2 fields. Right? So education, universities, and churches.
I'm just searching for the part that brought forth pessimism in you. Yes, the world has changed radically. Yes, people have to continue learning. If only they had access to some kind of electronic device that just had a lot of information, where they could, like, seek out learning and connect with other people. And wouldn't that be a really useful tool?
It's amazing.
Yeah, maybe you could build something like that.
I don't know. There's a little you on my phone.
Exactly. So, what's the pessimism? What is?
I'm just impatient.
Online is a means. What is online good at? At the same time, let's also, and Chancellor, I'll have you speak to this. The same year that MIT put all of its courses online, they never had more applicants. So there's 2 slices of information there. Millions of people can learn online, and people still want to gather in these tired old agricultural-based institutions. What is online good at, and what is the traditional university good at? Well, let's start with Sebastian.
So I'm the last one to kind of perpetuate this thing a journalist very easily write about, which is online is going to kill universities. As little as I believe that televised sports has killed ball games in stadiums, or television has killed radio. In fact, all these things really do is they change the access equation. So I view online as a beautiful thing to reach people that can't be reached today. We always think of the US education system, higher education system, as the marvel of the world, and it is, and UC Berkeley being the best public university in the world by a large margin. And it's going to stay there, in my opinion. But we sometimes forget that not every person in the world can make it to UC Berkeley, either through admissions or through age or obligations. People have jobs, they have mortgages to carry, by being in geographic regions that are generally not well connected. such as, for example, Germany. We have very few Germans apply to the US education system because of the SAT and other requirements, Middle East. So for me, it's an amplifier. We can go and reach people we could never reach before. We started a program at Georgia Tech, a master's degree program that we offer in computer science that costs about $6,000 online and is the same degree program as on campus for about $50,000. It's now running with about 2,000 students enrolled, huge number of applications. And almost everybody there has a job. The average age is about 11 years older than on campus. Almost everybody is from the United States, whereas on the on-campus master's program, almost everybody is international. And we are reaching people at this point that could never, ever partake in education by other means.
Mm-hmm. So, and they tend to be younger, the ones on campus.
Campus master students tend to come internationally because it's a great way to get a visa and get access to this country. And if you make it in Georgia Tech or UC Berkeley, you kind of a job guarantee.
Well, then there are concrete things they're buying for that premium.
Yeah.
That they're not buying on. Chancellor, what would you say?
Yeah, no, let me say a few things. First, Clark Kerr, who was the first chancellor of the University of California, Berkeley, and then the president of the University of California system between 1958 and 1967, worked with the governor, another Governor Brown at the time, but not our Governor Brown, to establish the famous master plan for higher education in the state of California. And as it was set up and as it was established and approved and agreed and funded in 1960, it actually did deliver on a promise of higher education for all the citizens of the state of California. It required funding. It required funding from the state of a very significant kind, but it included 3 different tiers: the community college system, the California State University system, and the University of California system. That was, of course, also rapidly expanding at the time. Even to this day, we continue to abide by the master plan, even though we're not funded anywhere close to the way we were back in those wonderful years. We still have, across the University of California, 30% of our undergraduate students transfers from California community colleges. So there are multiple pathways, and there's still the promise of a certain kind of universal education within the context of the state, of course, though indeed many things have changed. So just I wanted to point that out by virtue of saying that it's not the first time the promise of a universal education has been offered. Unfortunately, it does require, in that model, a certain level of commitment on the part of a state and a government and a people to ensure that it gets adequate funding. Having said that, a couple of things I just want to introduce, and I'm sure we actually agree about this virtually completely. First, to think about what online education can offer to new kinds of populations globally across a lifetime is indeed to embrace things that are fundamental to the mission of universities like Berkeley, like ones I've taught at across my career, and like Stanford. We have introduced over the last many decades all kinds of programs for executive education. In the past, they required coming to campus. Online makes it possible to, for the first time, really introduce forms of lifelong learning that can, I think, and I agree with you, fundamentally change the kind of access that people will have on a global scale to high-quality education. But there are several issues that we have to acknowledge. First, to learn how to learn online, you often, and we found this increasingly in the studies we've been doing through edX, which is the partnership that UC Berkeley is part of, you have to learn how to learn. And learning how to learn usually requires, I'm sorry, the agricultural model. It requires actually being in a schoolhouse, going to a school, being in a classroom, understanding and getting the kind of attention that young people need in order to get to the point where they can become self-learners. Now, surely one of the things that we pride ourselves in doing at a university like Berkeley is to teach our students how to be lifelong learners. So we embrace that as a project, and we are doing lots of things on campus, in fact, to extend the kinds of things that are going on campus to much broader populations. And we're delighted to partner with different institutions and organizations to help us do that better. But at the same time, what you said is absolutely the case. The year that MIT put its courses online, more people wanted to be at MIT. As we all know, the TED Talks that have become so popular and that are available on YouTube have actually generated more interest on the part of people actually going to the real TED Talk venue. There is something about being there that is, like it or not, and accessible or not, seen as having even higher value in the current age, I think, than it's ever had before. It has that value for a number of different reasons. It has it for instrumental reasons. People meet each other, there are networks that get established, there are certain kinds of opportunities that become available. And although I know that using social media mechanisms on the online space will open up networking possibilities in the online space, there's something about face-to-face interactions. But there's more than that. It's not just instrumental. There is, of course, on university campuses, a whole process of socialization that goes on. And that is extremely important. And beyond that, there is teaching that takes place in a classroom where you have a seminar format, where a student will have to present an argument or a book or an article or a discovery, and they'll have to make it persuasive to a group of people sitting around a table. That is an invaluable skill. And even, in fact, in today's Wall Street Journal, there's a piece saying that online is being used more and more and more for executive education, for specialized kinds of forms of skill training, but it doesn't rival the kind of training that goes into, that comes out of a in-person venue. So there are lots of questions about whether or not and to what extent the online space can exist independent from and to the exclusion of the residential college or university. I could go on, but I'll stop there. I think you probably want me to stop.
That's fine. I think it's probably interesting to think about the general curve of a new technology, which is to say it bumps up against an incumbent and is greeted with a certain level of incredulity, and then adapted. It finds its niche that is appropriate. And Sebastian, you've spent time, as I say, replicating a Stanford experience and then trying some remedial stuff at San Jose State. And now you're seeking this nano degree. Can you talk a little bit about each experience and how you've ended up at the nano degree?
Let me tell you about my experience with the California state system. About a year ago, if you opened the New York, in fact, you didn't have to open the New York Times. You didn't have to fold it over. On page A1, above the fold, my work was called a flop. The Financial Times said, I'm going out of business. Fast Company called my results disastrous.
Boy, you're lucky those people who gave you $35 million didn't see that stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Chronicle Higher Education said that I was a Bulgarian and deserved to be swept in the dustbin of history. And when you went down the totem pole of
seeing a pattern here.
Outlets, it got worse and worse and worse. So what happened? We had decided to team with the CSU system, which is a second-tier system, to bring college-level education to high schools, and specifically inner-city high schools. So inner-city high schools are disadvantaged because a lot of things that are available in rich high schools, like, say, a computer science AP class, isn't available to Latinos and black kids and poor kids and the kids that make our inner city. And to do so and make it affordable, we decided not to charge the $1,500 that a course normally costs, but charge $150. And we had kids learning. We did 2 pilots. In the first one, the kids didn't do quite as well as on campus, but it was much cheaper. And these were kids that wouldn't come to campus. In the second pilot, which we opened up, the average pass rate was identical to on campus, although the fabric of the people was a bit different. We also got lots of people with degrees. And it was actually really welcomed by the kids who said, look, I'm able to get now remedial done before I hit colleges. And in the CSU system, about 65 or so % of incoming students, instead of participating in the regular course of study, they have to first clear remedial, and remedial math, remedial English. Remedial math, if you don't do it your first time in, you're basically out. You have a second chance at a community college, and then you're basically out. And the reason why these kids fail is not because they're bad in math, but often because We don't have adequate K-12 education. This is like middle school type algebra. The only mistake they made, that left to these wonderful headlines is, we made it affordable. So we actually went in and said, we can use this medium and make it affordable. And affordable was about 10% of the regular cost. So the California Faculty Association, with everyone in close touch, almost weekly spoke to them, basically declared a war. And the war was manifest in media reporting. They actually put a website up with a video about me, where I'm being blamed for the subprime mortgage crisis. You can look it up. It's true. And Daphne Korda and edX, Arnold Agarwal as well. Yeah. And they changed internally the rules to put permission hurdles for large-scale courses up that became unsurmountable. So in one case, we tried to get, following these new rules, a class approved for credit. And I was told it would take 1.5 years for the first committee meeting to even consider that application.
So what you're saying is essentially you were driven out by the institutional antibodies.
Yeah, so I walked away questioning whether the concern is really with the student, or when innovation comes along, the fear of possible job loss takes over and takes first position. And I called up my colleague, or my friend, I would say, at the CFA, actually even organized kind of secret off-the-record meeting with the governor and presidents and the CFA to see if we can have consensus about it. I got initially even endorsement by the California Faculty Association, which is the labor union for the CSU system. So I called them up and say, hey, was this just an accident? Did you just like leak something accidentally and get me this really bad headline? Or should I expect more of it? And the answer was, Sebastian, don't take it personal. That's how California works. And I felt sad. I felt that, I mean, at some level, we should all care about the students, and the students should be our primary concern. And be it inner city high school kids, or be it people in more advanced ages, we should, as educators, strive to serve in everything we can do. But political reality is, and Governor Brownie was sitting here with completely confirms, I believe, is it doesn't work that way. There's so many groups entrenched and in this system, in this extremely massively expensive system, that stand to lose ground if we went back and, for example, made it more affordable, that I became enemy of state #1. And I can tell you, it did feel good. That's one of the reasons why we broke out. We now have our own degrees. We call them nano degrees.
Let's pause on the nano degrees, because it is an interesting subject. But I think, Chancellor, it's an interesting opportunity for you to spend a little time talking about the relationship between adapting a new technology that will, in some ways, challenge both the teaching style and the physical operation of a university system that is, yeah, shut for 3 months every summer. Are there corporate antibodies? Is there institutional resistance? And do they have legitimate points? And how do you accept those? How do you grow? How do you adapt what may be a radically new style of education?
Well, I'll just say that when I read in the New York Times, which treated you very well in the beginning, when you did your extraordinary experiment in the course you launched in artificial intelligence and got, I don't remember how many, 170,000 people to sign up in the first instance. I was very keen to talk with colleagues at Columbia, where I worked at the time, to see what we might be able to do to use some of the new online opportunities to develop programs. We were most successful there, as indeed we have been at the University of California at Berkeley, in developing master's programs, because it's precisely in a postgraduate or post-BA, BS kind of context that you have students who do have the background and capacity to learn. At the same time, whether you're dealing with the University of California, Cal State, or the community colleges across the state, it's an extraordinarily diverse population, as you said. And there are many students who come without the same level of background you would necessarily want to succeed right away in advanced math and in basic and fundamental fields, from writing to quantitative reasoning, that that are often very difficult to teach well when students don't have the proper background.
It sounds like you have a little bit of time for his argument that he got sandbagged.
Absolutely. I think that in the first instance, the the need to collaborate is something that, that we embrace. And what I find most extraordinary about things going on at Berkeley itself are the number of people who are working on new kinds of online and technological platforms to use a space that we know all of our students use. They all Google Wikipedia. They all, in fact, will even go to the library and sit next to each other and use digitalized course packs side by side as they want to have us extend the hours of our undergraduate libraries to 24/7, right? And absolutely, we live in a world in which technology is so familiar to people of a college generation that you would hope that it could be used in ways that would be fully supplemental. But I think the real issue here, in some sense, I think, is that there were promises made about what online could do that inevitably were going to disappoint.
Like what?
Like it was going to open up a completely global democratic space for everyone to participate without having to pay tuition and without having to go through the cost structure of the university. And we have yet to see.
That's happened, actually.
Well, that's terrific. I haven't read that yet, but
I mean,
it's
about a third of the world is online, so 2/3 is not even online. So, yeah, those people won't. Yeah.
But the issue is what the outcomes are, and I think one of the other things that we've discovered at Berkeley, and indeed this is being worked on by a lot of our colleagues in edX, is to use the work that's being done online to learn more about how students learn, and thereby then to incorporate increasingly the kind of information that we get from looking at the online experiments that are taking place to develop new ways to deliver the kinds of things that our students need, often kinds that begin with fundamental, basic courses and knowledge, but that go on all the way through any number of curricula to supplement the kind of work that they do. Mm-hmm. The issue here, though, is at the end of the day, whether or not and to what extent the online space will substitute for, will replace, will ultimately supplant residential learning experiences. So far, what we find is that people, all things considered, at least at a certain stage of their lives and a certain point in their trajectories, would like to have, all things considered, a residential experience. Numbers of applications at Berkeley, 90,000 last year. Keeps going up by about 10,000 every year. Having said that, the issue you raise is a very fundamental one. The cost of higher education is a big problem. What we do at Berkeley, of course, is we deal with that by, and you do the same thing at Stanford, by extraordinary levels of financial aid. 40% of our students pay no tuition at all. No student who comes from a family making less than $80,000 has to pay tuition. And they get support for a lot more than just the tuition. They get living expenses and fees and so on as well. The problem here, ultimately, is going to be how we're going to fund the sufficient number of residential college experiences for the citizens who need this kind of education, the kind of education that will actually prepare them both for being citizens of the world, being people who can take advantage of life in a full kind of sense, and people who have the skills they need to enter the workplace and be successful there. And this is a challenge. It's a challenge that we share. I think it's a challenge that will require a great deal of use of online technological spaces. But it's nevertheless one where I think we have to be honest and say, so far, the kind of value that comes from a residential college experience has not lost its place.
Let's bear in mind you're at a very special, we're speaking of very, very special universities when we speak of those. I mean, these are the most elite institutions that are getting flooded with applications from around the world. I'm not sure it universalizes to all tertiary education. But Sebastian, in your case, I think in some ways you're following a very classic kind of technology curve. Think of healthcare. Technology, so many high-tech people have tried to attack healthcare, and they bump up against regulators and they bump up against incumbent systems, which is why we've seen this explosion of health trackers and quantified self and personal fitness. It wasn't an area where they were before. They sort of found a genius in moving over to an area where the health industry didn't exist in a big way, and the government regulators didn't exist in a big way. It seems to me that's what you're doing with these nano degrees. You're doing very, very tight relationships with corporations for people who already have jobs to continue in their work sets. And I know there is some, adult ed or master's programs for people who can break away for some time and go to it. But talk about that innovation and why you think this time you've got a model that works.
Yeah, we've been wildly enthusiastic about the recent months and year since we got scolded in California and decided to retract from our plan to help inner city high school kids by building a program that we call nano degrees. Nano stands for short. It's about a billionth of a degree, so to speak, to really help people of all ages to be employable and really find jobs. Average wait time right now after college, even if you graduate, is about a year in this country. And in many, many places, the graduation rate is south of 50%. Often, four-year degree tends to stay on average about 6 years. So it's not a great statistic. And the costs, of course, have gone up in the last 30 years faster than any other costs, 7.5% year in, year out, which compares to inflation, which is about 3%. So we decided to really use our muscle to bring education that really renders people employable. And we can argue what that is. I'm not claiming we've solved that as a broad thing, but we then asked the question, what is the packaging, what is the content, what does it look like? And felt that, if we go to the leading employers in this nation, like the Googles in the world and the Facebooks, we at least get from them what they want, because they articulate very clearly what type of skills are required. So in my own field, computer science, I have a computer science professor right over there, a very famous one, Amanda Fox. He'll confirm that a lot of stuff that's being taught is often outdated by the very nature of the fact that the technology flips over every 5 or so years, whereas tenure flips over every 35 years. So there's kind of an impedance mismatch. So a lot of programming languages being taught are outdated. It's almost like if half your language classes are like in Latin, and then you want people to go into the international politics industry. So we go to these companies. These companies are more than eager to build curriculum with us. In fact, they pay for it, which is great. And in creating a new credential that we call Nano Degree, we got an industry-wide kind of platform. We founded a group of companies called Open Education Alliance, where companies, about 20 Fortune 500 companies, are together endorsing jointly this new level. And it's an online, kind of on-demand, mastery-based education that teaches you skills. Educators often, it doesn't really compare, I think, to this beautiful picture of taking a 17-year-old and making them a mature adult. It's much thinner than this. It's really meant to say, you're in this field over here, and that field is kind of on a downturn. We can put you right over here with your skill set and give you the right tools to be employable. So for example, IT workers right now are losing jobs because of the cloud. There's a big restructuring happening in the industry. But many of them are very smart. If you turn them into iPhone programmers or into mobile programmers or data scientists and data analysts, they can have a very nice job. The Nano Degree idea is that you do this throughout your lifetime. So you come in, very quickly learn something, and then go on. In fact, the way you deal with Google, you go in there very fast, you get the information you want, and you're out. The idea is that to minimize the educational complexity necessary to really lift you up to the next stage in your life. And we've been blown away by the interest we received. So a week ago, we opened up one of those for about 3 days, and the number of applications were 40 times as big as we'd hoped. So there's certainly a thirst. And these are typically people that don't see it as an alternative to college. They're typically 24 to 35-year-olds. But I think the working population is realizing there's fewer and fewer jobs, and it's harder and harder to get them. And people are more and more feeling they have to be upskilled. I take a bit of issue with my San Jose State story, because I feel if universities only understood how big the market really is, they would go after it. And I go to my colleagues from various universities, presidents like today, and just describe this. And I have yet to see a university other than Georgia Tech kind of really massively go into this.
Can I just respond to one thing? Because when I responded to your question about whether or not the promises had been overblown, and when I responded and I said I thought the promises had been overblown, you responded by saying, no, that's not the case. But what you're describing is something very different than what was at least the rhetoric that surrounded the beginning of your enterprise and that of your colleague Daphne Koller and Coursera and many of the statements that were being made, including by the governor of the state, about what the online space was going to do. Immediately, sort of begin eviscerating the whole structure of brick and mortar colleges and universities. What you're talking about now is something that sounds incredibly important and absolutely critical to especially the kind of workforce you're talking about. You're talking about trained computer scientists who need to be able to retool. They know how to learn. They obviously are very, very well educated to begin with. And you're helping them learn new skills for in these kinds of very specific contexts for the changing conditions that are, in fact, are going to, I agree, change even faster in the world ahead. But I haven't heard you talk about the things that you just said were, in fact, the refutation of the things that I had said.
Just to be precise, I said has mostly happened when you said that the opening up of education to the world would happen. And I think Coursera in particular, edX, a whole bunch of other institutions, Khan Academy, and just to a lesser extent us actually, really succeeded in making university-level classes available online for free. And free, well, only a third of the world has internet access. And streaming costs are still high in certain countries. So there's certainly costs. But it's just about as free as you could make it. And honestly, we are all in for the good of the world. We all care about democratization of education. That's our motto is democratization of education, makes it everybody. I think what has happened in the last 2 years has been amazing in terms of you find kids, 12-year-old kids in Pakistan, all of a sudden taking Udacity and Coursera classes. Time magazine had a cover on one of those people. They were invited to the World Economic Forum to report on what this means. Soldiers in Afghanistan, people in the Middle East. There's a training center in Ghana that runs Udacity and Coursera classes. It's stunning to me how much progress has been made in 2 years, right, compared to. So I would not entirely kind of swipe this under the carpet. But I'm also the first to admit we have to learn a lot. We have to improve. We have to improve the recipe. We started out with finishing rates of 30%. We now moved up to about 90%. But there's a lot of learning in there, and we need the time to learn. When you say the rhetoric of replacing universities, I think we've all fallen into a trap. And the trap is journalism. It's so much easier. Sorry, Quentin. Nothing personal.
He's a professor.
Don't worry.
You've been outside of it. You certainly didn't
If you
write
want to see an
anything.
industry that's been decimated by online,
Yeah.
I invite you.
Actually, one of many journalists that wrote about us are also professors, and the most ardent ones are professors. And one journalist once told me the reason why I'm so extreme, Sebastian, is because we have just been burned. So I want to tell them they'll also be burned. The rhetoric in this day and age is a bit because journalism and opinion blasting and blogism has gone so global that the loudest voice gets the most here. And that's the article that's being passed around everybody in the positive and negative space. So what I think was a social consensus that existed, I'm a university professor, became a confrontation.
Yeah.
And that helped nobody, in my opinion.
There may be habits of media there. There may also be habits of technology there. I've had many
I'm sure
shades.
we're also arrogant. Yeah.
Many shades of conversation where the technologist, in one case, has literally said to me, "We are the nimble mammals dancing around the dying dinosaurs," you know. And the dinosaurs take that really personally. I got to say, you know, we don't like that.
Dinosaurs in the room, raise your hand.
Yeah. Okay, I'm proud of it. But you know, Chancellor, he's actually identified something that does happen, which is the new technology finds a new space and a new genius that rises up and becomes a formidable new component. As I think, you know, you rightly pointed out, television doesn't replace radio, but television exists in the landscape. And really what's interesting to me in the nanodegrees area is corporations devising educational curricula, which may or may not be a good thing, a certain absence of abstract skills judgment. It's relative to a particular course, which may also be okay. These are just differences. I'm not pointing to anything good or bad. And a relationship, which you pointed out early on, of a person to lifelong education. And I think you can hold your feet to the fire on that. You know, Cal gives somebody a degree and then hits them up as an alumni, or maybe comes back for a little continuing education, but doesn't say, we're the place you need to come to learn what you need to learn next. And do you think that's a fair knock, and you going to cede that to him?
No, I'm not going to cede it, nor do I think it's a fair knock. So that's a concise answer, but let me just say a few things about that. First of all, unlike some other universities, private universities in particular, the University of California only very recently has really reached out to its alumni to help support. And that's because the state has stopped supporting us. And so we have to do it. Stanford does it. Stanford does it spectacularly well.
Yeah, really good at it.
And we're trying to
trained.
do as well as you guys, believe
By the
me.
way, if you want to make a donation tonight, there's a little jar back there.
We have our jar over there.
You also
the other side of the room.
take checks.
Ooh, smack
It's
down.
the big game. Here we are. But
You should, honestly.
But that being said, you know, we have Diana Wu, who's here in the audience tonight, who is our dean of the Extension School at University of California, Berkeley, and we are designing course after course after course, which is designed for our alumni. In fact, it's designed for anybody. I mean, this is open. I mean, we actually are making these things available, and we're trying to do so in ways that will be genuinely open and free.
And would you let a corporation design a UC course?
Well, you know, usually corporations come and ask us to give them the material or train the people who would be designing these courses. I think, you know, there are lots of places where we collaborate with and we profit from that collaboration with corporations. And we have all sorts of partnerships, believe me.
If he's heading for your wheelhouse, Sebastian, you're doing something right.
Look, so I'm going to be provocative just for a second.
That's good.
Provocative. So I think one thing that you learn in Silicon Valley is you become simultaneously extremely arrogant and humble. You become arrogant because Mark Andreessen says software eats the world, and we all believe we can just make an Uber happen or an Airbnb, and possibly even break the law, and it's good for the world. And you become humble because you really ask the fundamental questions: what is the essence of something devoid of the past? So I'm anti-historian. A lot of, in my opinion, here's very provocative, a lot of what happening today is really grounded in the past in a different labor force, different society, different technology base. And to me, an answer I hear often, yeah, we do this all, doesn't go far enough. To me, I really want to ask the fundamental question, if we were to reinvent it again, what would we do? And I have a hard time believing that the recipe we came up 150 or so years ago would have been a right answer today. And I feel we are much more often in dialogue to argue why what we do today is exactly the right thing to do.
I think it's somewhat presumptuous to say this is exactly like it was 150 years ago.
There's
evolved.
people who say this. So if you read,
They say it, but
if you
let's
read
let the Chancellor
Rich
address
DeMille's
that.
book from Georgia Tech, who researches this historical aspect, and I'm not a historian, he goes as far to say the most recent innovation that really changed the nature of teaching was the chalkboard in 1802. There's changes, but if you look at the education industry, the way it's organized today, it is surprisingly similar to 100 years ago compared to many other industries.
Yeah, you know,
Like take farming, take chemical research, take medicine, take journalism. All these things have massively changed. Education and priesthood hasn't.
the church and the university, the two dinosaurs. All the other dinosaurs are in the museums. That's the where the
I'll
two
be
that are
heading
still
there
dancing.
after this.
Yeah. You know, it's that actually is something that has been said a great deal of late. That's another truism that I have to say has the benefit of general and provocative claims, but it's not really true. We're changing all the time. I mean, first of all, the knowledge that is being produced in universities is not only changing, it's changing the world. It's changing, I mean, much of the innovation that comes out of, that Northern California is about, came out of Berkeley and Stanford.
I agree.
So let's be clear. The Silicon Valley is a predicate. It is an effect of what we do in universities. Point number one. And by the way, we're proud and we're not even humble about that. I mean, that's something I don't have to even qualify. But having said that, what is interesting to me is how much we think about change at the same time that we do hold on to the past. We hold on to the past because there are things that we would lose, and we would lose them forever if we didn't decide that we needed to be careful in how we adjust to some of the changing conditions that are there. So we have museums where we put dinosaurs and we study them, and then it becomes available, in fact, for a major project that's been funded by the National Science Foundation to learn about the way we can predict climate change in the future by, in fact, taking the data we have across all the museum collections at Berkeley to look at how climate has changed in the past. The past actually does help us predict the future. It helps us adjust to the future. In the case of climate change, it will hopefully help us deal with what are going to be cataclysmic changes.
For the sake of our radio audience, when the Chancellor said, "We take our dinosaurs to museums," he indicated the journalist. Sir, watch this space.
I think chicken when I think dinosaur. It's a different story.
Let's take a couple of questions from the audience. How will online education affect the global workforce and global labor flows? Do you have any ideas?
If I get my way, and if the hypothesis underlying Udacity is valid, I believe has the potential to have an absolute tremendous impact. I mean, I see UC Berkeley as the world's best public university and up there with the Ivy Leagues on par. But the accessibility, the access equation for that institution, and the same with other Ivy League level institutions and Stanford, really preclude access to a very small selected number. In the United States, more than 80% of the students go to schools that aren't even listed in the U.S. News and World Report. And that's in the United States alone, and only mostly young people go. Older people like myself don't go. And then worldwide, my friend Thomas Friedman, who works for your paper, a columnist, writes about education in the Middle East. And at some point I had a chance to ask him, like, why do you see these things together? And he told me, look, I believe if we were able to bring good education to the Middle East and give people this perspective, we had fewer terrorists. And I don't know whether that's correct or not, but I believe education is this thing that empowers people. We have amazing resources in this country and amazing paths for young people to be educated. If we shared this with the world, I think the world would be massively a better place. In fact, some of you know that I've worked on self-driving cars before. I worked on wearable computers, on internet for everybody, on contact lenses that can give you diabetes reading non-invasively. I think education is the single biggest thing that we can work on and spread, and specifically access to education.
We agree entirely. Education is, I think, indeed the single greatest good, and it's what we need to unite in trying to figure out precisely in relationship to those questions of access, of availability, and at this point in history, of global reach. And these are issues that are, I think, going to become even more critical as we are thinking not just about training new kinds of workforces, adjusting to new kinds of economies in which, increasing reliance on the kinds of robotic instruments that you've been designing over the years, Sebastian, does in fact displace and require then major changes in the labor force of the future. At the same time, I do believe that the education we offer, the education we certainly offer at a place like Berkeley, is an education that helps people think about what these adjustments might mean, put them in a larger context of thinking about growing inequality, trying to understand what the social, political implications are of these kinds of fundamental technological and economic changes. And of course, we also try to train people to think both critically and creatively about how to engage the kinds of challenges that are precisely part of this future so that we can continue that tradition of a holistic kind of education and approach to the challenges of the future. So I think we are.
Let's use that as a jumping off point to take this question. Chancellor, 10 years from now, how much of Berkeley's budget and teaching will be generated, influenced by online activity, online revenues. Do you think there will be large courses untouched by online behavior, or will everything be touched by it?
Oh, I'm sure there'll be courses untouched by online in the form of classroom instruction. I don't think there's a single course now that isn't touched by online in relationship to the digitalization of the materials that are being used in courses. And that's a major shift from when I started teaching. I started teaching with Xerox machines and course packs and all the rest of it. But
now
the large lecture course, I mean, just as an example, I mean, I think the interesting thing about the large lecture course is it's seen as something that can be totally replaced by online lectures. Sometimes yes, and sometimes no. Or rather, yes and no. There is still huge value to having somebody like you and somebody like you come to a lecture hall on a campus, give a lecture, ignite the kind of energy that a classroom situation is uniquely able to do, and bring people in some sense into a relationship with the material that you're providing. That, again, under the best of circumstances, they can go back then and look at again and again and again. But I begin with the lecture, and then I move out to the reproduction and see the digitalization of all these kinds of activities as being nothing but complements to, supplements of, the things that we will do on campus.
What are subjects?
So I can't really answer that in a predictive sense, because I think we're going to find that it's going to be all so intermeshed. It'll almost be impossible to disentangle.
Okay, put it this way:
the technological,
by gut or by data, what are subjects? What are types of learning that don't lend themselves to online areas? What's been tough to teach online?
So I mean, I can only speak for Udacity, and I think the new wave of experimentation is young. So it's very hard to make a negative statement. But obviously, playing tennis, I wouldn't do purely online. Dance. It's actually interesting. I always felt that surgery is one of these things that require like the physical corpse. But it turns out when you dive into it, simulation is much better. So it turns out there's surgical haptic simulators that you can use where you can operate.
Absolutely.
And while it is not quite as good as the cadaver because it's not real, you have an undo button, right? You have a cheat button. You can take all the skin away, take a look, and put the skin on again. And you can operate 100, 1,000 times as much as you can do with a physical cadaver. I think we're in the early age. We're exploring it. Udacity obviously focuses entirely on tech skills, on entrepreneurship, on computer skills. And there, the nice thing is, I mean, computer program is just about as online as it gets. I mean, the physical keyboards aren't that important. And we can actually auto-grade people very easily. We can really assess whether a solution is correct. That's what a computer does by its very nature when it does something. So it's an easy field. It's also a fast-moving field, an industry that really is hungry for labor, with millions of open positions. My friends at Cloudera tell me, Cloudera is one of our partner companies, that if you take their education, your entry-level salary will be north of $300,000. So it's really desperate for skills. So I'm navigating my company more carefully. Some mentions like edX and Coursera have kind of been much more broad. They've been much more in the college space, we are in the work space. And they've really taken philosophy classes and arts classes. And I have to say the level of innovation is staggering. I wouldn't say every single class I've seen is great, but at least we're experimenting. At least we're out there. We're trying these things and see what happens. And I find this extremely encouraging. And I guess now I'm not a pessimist anymore.
So
yeah,
there you go.
Sound very pessimistic.
We brought one around. So you are both among the most formally educated and credentialed people in the world. You know, you're both extremely accomplished, credentialed, educated people. What parts of your own education do you wish had been online, and which parts were utterly irreplaceable in the classroom? You had mentors. You had great discoveries, Sebastian. What part?
My education was not good. So
Really?
Yeah, I had a professor. We had
so this is all a grudge thing.
We had four. Yeah, it's true. Taking my revenge. Look, I had 4 professors in my computer science department, 1,200 students. It took a year to get an appointment for office hours. I ended up learning from books exclusively. I want to kind of comment a little bit on the lecture thing, because I I've been bugged by the lectures that I attended because I often couldn't even hear the professor from the third row on. That's in Germany. It's not UC Berkeley. It was never admitted to UC Berkeley, I should say.
Not too late.
When the first Udacity class started, and that's the one that kind of kicked off the entire kind of MOOC frenzy, the artificial intelligence class, I digitized myself and put myself into quizzes. And there's 3 interesting numbers that came out of it. Out of 200 students, only 35 showed up in class. These are kids paying $50,000 to see famous professors like me, and they would prefer me online. Second number, when I gave them a midterm and a final, I've done this for many years, the average grade in both exams was a whole letter grade better than my in-class teaching. And I always thought of myself as a good professor. And the third number is, we obviously taught the same class not just on campus in the conventional way. We taught it online as a massive open online course. We had 160,000 students. When we finally ranked the online finishers to the Stanford finishers and see who's better, the top 412 students were online students from all over the world. And the best performing Stanford student out of a cohort of 200 was number 413. So I think we should look at this and we should study that data and ask the forbidden question, which is, could it be that there's a space where this new medium works better? Could it be that the student's ability to go at their own pace is really better than listen synchronously to a professor? Could it be the ability to rewind your professor, to make the system more interactive, almost like a tutor beats certain classrooms? I'm not saying it's the case. It's just the case with me, which means I'm really a lousy teacher.
Speak to that.
Well, I think these are good questions. These are important questions to raise. I think, first of all, and what you were saying before, there are clearly very, very clever, very talented students who have the wherewithal to learn on their own without needing to go to a lecture or necessarily have the kinds of things that come from a residential college experience, although I would argue there are other kinds of skills that they could not get otherwise. But that being said, again, I see the way in which we move in the future as one in which we keep this interplay going back and forth between what we can do with online technology and what we need to do in person. There are lots of forms of drudgery that are part of the teaching life in a university. I don't know any faculty who like to read an essay 2, 3, 4 times and make corrections. I would love to have you develop an online way to teach basic writing kinds of skills so that we can actually provide the context where you can take a paper and put it into a classroom context where you can learn again and again and again how to make a more effective argument, how to write better, how to do a thesis statement in a way that opens up the argument. At the same time, that I would never want to lose the opportunity to have that paper discussed in a kind of classroom situation or with a particular professor or mentor and see how critical reactions, how immediate kinds of responses, how the give and take and ebb and flow of a wonderful classroom context will also inform ultimately the difference between what is workmanlike writing and what is ultimately writing that works, writing that really touches people, writing that can persuade, writing that can move people. So I see the iterative question you raise, if you can do things over and again at your own pace. Absolutely. There are all kinds of ways in which we're working precisely to provide, again, in the supplemental forms that some of these things exist, opportunities for students to learn. And indeed, we even have forms of online instruction at Berkeley where the instructor sits there with faces of all the people in the classroom, wherever they are, all over the world, and calls on them and makes sure that they participate and engineers interactions. But it's, again, a synchronous kind of context. It's not one that can necessarily be repeated in that format. It can be repeated in other formats, but it can't be repeated in that. It's hybrid. So that, to me, is just the beginning of an answer that nevertheless predicts that we're not going to be able to detach these things completely. And I don't think, want to. I think we would lose too much. I think the question of affordability you raise is critical, but I think that's something we have to address as a society. We used to be able to fund accessible, affordable, high-quality education. I believe we have to do that again. And we can do it probably better with the online technological developments that are taking place, as long as we don't lose the great things we have.
That actually leads to my last question from the audience, and I just wanted to say that reading through the cards, there's an exceptional amount of esteem and awe for the UC system, for traditional education. There's also a remarkable level of optimism for what online can do, particularly for delivering education to students who simply will not access the UC system or anything like it in their lifetime through the chance of geography or economic circumstance. Nonetheless, are bright people who want to learn. That sounds fantastic. I'll turn to the last question. Speak about the role of government and cost, because you were just talking about that. Do you think government can get involved in this and in online learning in a way that is healthy and productive?
You mean in terms of producing online kinds of spaces, or in terms of supporting
regulating,
and
supplementing? Would you
supporting?
Yeah. Would you welcome
absolutely
government regulation and
absolutely.
credentialism, Sebastian? Speak to it, Chancellor, first.
Well, first, I would say we would absolutely welcome having more government support of all the things we do that include developing new kinds of online technologies and indeed making them more available to a wider group of people. Trying to find ways in which, wherever these students are, I mean, I've spent much of my life, 6 years I spent in India as a historian and anthropologist. I've worked in little villages, and I have worked there and seen the kinds of needs that people have, the kind of extraordinary people who could be and are now being touched by online courses that they can access when they can. I think it is a global issue. I think it's something where, if we're going to talk about government, we have to actually think about this as a global project. And I think there are all kinds of ways in which we can reach out and find new ways to support precisely the kind of educational goals that we both share. I think that in as much as government can help support that, that's a great thing. Regulation, well, we still have to regulate how we define our degrees. We still have to regulate how we accredit institutions. We still have to ensure that we are offering high quality education, whatever it is. And so we use a variety of bodies. I mean, that is in fact a place where there is a certain value to tradition. We have traditional institutions that are attentive to how you accredit and how you evaluate the kinds of things we do, the kinds of degrees we offer. Will they have to open themselves up to the online space? Absolutely. But I think whether it's being done by government or by the institutions that we have and value right now, we do have to maintain a regulatory context for thinking about all of the things we do as education.
Well, Sebastian, as you move to nano degrees, which are very targeted for corporate needs and the corporations themselves can speak to what they want, do you think formal credentialing and regulation is a good thing, or does it create more antibodies?
I mean, first, the government question, it's probably well known that Governor Brown, whom I deeply admire and respect, has been an ardent supporter of innovation. I don't think he's been proclaiming we have a solution, but he's really pushing the issue. And just go to the regents meeting that happens regularly, or the trustees meeting in the CSU system, and you hear him very clearly articulating and pushing towards a different solution. And the reason why I specifically threw my entire company at his feet to help inner city high school kids is because he came to me with a plea and said, look, we got to fix that. And I felt a social responsibility to engage in this. In terms of regulations, I think we're at a time where it's probably good to let the free market sort it out. In that we now live in a world that's very transparent. Education is a commoditizable industry. So in principle, there could be multiple copies of the same, and there can be intense competition. And what competition often does is drives down the prices and makes the products better. I think if we let private industry figure that out, at least for a while, we are better off. We have an example where well-intended government intervention led to almost the opposite effect, and that is to some extent Title IV funding, which is government-guaranteed student loans for students in need. What institutions that shall remain unnamed in the for-profit space have understood how that loophole could be exploited. And there's major education institutions with, at peak time, up to 500,000 students, massively living up to 98% of the revenue derived from government expenses, and graduation rate often in the 20% range, because they didn't care about graduation, they cared about the government loans. And that's the case for me. The speed of innovation right now makes it almost impossible to come to good regulations. The regulatory instrument is a very slow one. And if there's a bug in the regulation system, there will be companies that exploit this. So to me, my word to the Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, and many others is, let's not move fast. There's a big revolution happening right now at this moment. It's really massive, in my opinion. I might be a little bit optimistic here because I'm running one of those companies. But I think it's good for private industry to step in. In the end of the day, it's all about the student. It's all about the customer, as we call it in Silicon Valley. And the customer has needs, and the customer has a financial situation, and the customer wants to stay engaged and wants to be educated, wants to be an active member of the society. I think it's time for opening this up, in my opinion. In fact, if anything at all, I think we should have less regulation on the admissions body of becoming a university, the accreditation body. That happens to be extremely difficult to navigate. I think for regional accreditation, I haven't seen a single new institution in the last decade or so that would have gained regional accreditation. We are lucky at Udacity in that nanodegrees aren't regulated. In fact, there is no law governing nanodegrees. There's certificates that aren't even, and they actually it's half a year old. So there's no law against education, which means you can just freely educate people. So unless in the medical space where the FDA has a law that illegalizes certain activity, or in the airspace where the FAA illegalizes things, or in the radio communication space where the FCC holds authority, in the education space, for what we're doing right now, there's no legal framework, and we enjoy this because we let the companies dictate what they really want, and they become our accrediting body. And that's nice because it levels the playing field for everybody.
Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for tonight. On behalf of the World Affairs Council, I would like to thank the panelists for their enlightening remarks, and thank all of you in the audience, in person and online, for taking part in this program. Thank you and good night.